the lead singer of the band Nirvana, overdosed on painkillers and alcohol. But the final blow came from the barrel of a gun, and it was a shot heard across a generation.
We all know how this story ends. Kurt Cobain, lead singer and guitarist of Nirvana, died at the young age of 27. In fact, he has now been dead for more years than he was alive. But before he became an icon, Kurt was just a boy from nowhere, a kid with big dreams who rose to the top of the world. And when he finally stood at the summit of fame, discontent and pain were all that awaited him. Nirvana was the defining band of the 90s, fusing raw punk energy with catchy melodic hooks that resonated deeply with a wide audience. Their music captivated millions, and the band's albums became bestsellers across the globe. Kurt Cobain was full of contradictions. He often appeared sincere, yet his words were laced with sarcasm. While he acted indifferent, deep down, he placed immense pressure on himself. Even though he claimed that fame wasn't important to him, he was frustrated when Nirvana songs didn't get enough airplay, and despite craving privacy, he continued to give interviews to major media outlets. His relationship with fame was complicated, to say at least. At times, he downplayed his ambitions, but in other moments, he openly admitted that becoming a rock star was all he had ever wanted.
But at a really early age, I wanted to be a rock and roll star.
I didn't want to be a rock star at all. It was freaking me out.
These contrasting feelings highlight the internal struggle that shaped much of his life. And that was the paradox of Kurt Cobain. How could someone who achieved everything they ever dreamed of still feel such deep pain? How could a man who inspired so many people feel so lost himself? Kurt Donald Cobain was born on February 20th, 1967, in Aberdeen, Washington. A small industrial town offered little for a young boy with big dreams. Kurt came from humble beginnings. His father worked as a mechanic, and his mother was a waitress. From an early age, Kurt battled health challenges. At just 7 years old, he was diagnosed with attention deficit disorder, ADD, and was prescribed Ritalin to help manage his symptoms. Some have speculated that being prescribed medication like Ritalin at such a young age could have influenced his later struggles with addiction. While there is no definitive evidence, it raises questions about how early experiences shape future battles. Despite these struggles, music was always a part of his life. By the age of 2, Kurt was already singing, and by 14 he had picked up his first guitar. It was then that his journey truly began. Though music provided an escape, Kurt's childhood was anything but easy. When he was just 9 years old, his parents divorced, an event that had a profound impact on him. Kurt became withdrawn and angry, traits that would follow him into adulthood. He believed that somehow he was to blame for their split, a burden that weighed heavily on him throughout his teenage years. Initially, he lived with his mother, where he witnessed domestic violence in her relationship with an abusive partner. In 1979, his mother gave full custody to his father, and Kurt moved in with him. His father remarried, despite promising Kurt he wouldn't. Struggling to adjust to the new family dynamic, he often took out his frustration on his younger step-siblings. By the time he was 15, the tension at home had reached a breaking point, and his father gave up on him. Over the next 4 years, Kurt bounced between 10 different families, as no one could handle him for long. He felt ashamed of his family situation, desperately longing for the stability and security of a typical family. With nowhere else to go, Kurt often slept on the streets or stayed with friends. At 19, he was arrested for vandalism, a reflection of the chaos and frustration building inside him. Despite the emotional struggles, Kurt's passion for music never faded. In high school, he met Chris Novoselic, and together they began jamming, sharing a mutual love for punk rock. What started as simple jam sessions would soon evolve into one of the most influential bands of all time, Nirvana. In 1989, Nirvana released their debut album Bleach under the indie label Sub Pop. The album was raw and unpolished, yet it captured the energy and angst of the underground Seattle music scene. But Kurt wanted more. He wasn't satisfied with being just another indie band. He had bigger ambitions, even if he sometimes denied it. Little did Kurt know that his desire for more would soon be fulfilled in ways he could never have imagined. By 1991, Nirvana had signed with a major label, and their second album, Nevermind, was about to change everything. Nirvana released Nevermind, an album that would become the defining sound of a generation. Led by the explosive single Smells Like Teen Spirit, Nirvana went from underground icons to mainstream superstars almost overnight. The album topped the charts, and suddenly, Kurt Cobain found himself thrust into the spotlight, exactly where he never wanted to be. But with fame came new pressures that Kurt struggled to cope with. The media branded him the voice of Generation X, a title he openly rejected. Cobain often expressed frustration with how he was perceived by the public. He felt misunderstood, as if his artistic vision had been reduced to a label he never wanted. As Nirvana's success skyrocketed, so did the demands on Kurt. Endless touring, media scrutiny, and the pressures of being the face of the grunge movement began to take a toll. To the outside world, Kurt Cobain was living the dream, but on the inside, he was slowly unraveling. Behind the scenes, Kurt turned to heroin to escape. What started as a way to self-medicate his chronic stomach pain soon spiraled into a full-blown addiction. Kurt claimed that heroin helped numb his pain, both physical and emotional. However, those close to him saw how it consumed his life. Kurt's heroin use began to affect not only his health, but also the band's dynamic. Bandmates Chris Novoselic and Dave Grohl grew increasingly concerned as Kurt's drug use became more erratic. His addiction was no longer a secret, and the media quickly latched onto the story. Despite these struggles, Nirvana's success continued to climb. But with every passing day, the weight of fame, expectations, and personal demons grew heavier on Kurt's shoulders. During the peak of Nirvana's success, Kurt found himself entangled in a relationship that would define much of his personal life, his marriage to Courtney Love. They met in the late 80s, but their relationship didn't become serious until Nirvana had reached stardom. In February 1992, Kurt and Courtney were married in a private ceremony on Waikiki Beach, Hawaii. Their relationship was intense and volatile. The media quickly latched onto their every move, often painting Courtney as a destructive influence. Both Kurt and Courtney struggled with drug addiction, and their chaotic relationship was constantly in the public eye. In August 1992, they had a daughter, Frances Bean Cobain, who quickly became a central figure in Kurt's life. Despite the joy of becoming a father, it couldn't ease Kurt's inner turmoil. The pressure mounted as rumors about their drug use became public. In one infamous Vanity Fair article, Courtney allegedly admitted to using heroin during her pregnancy. The story sparked outrage, and the couple was temporarily investigated by Child Protective Services. Kurt denied the allegations, but the damage to their public image was done. After Kurt's death, Frances was raised primarily by her mother, though she also had a strained relationship with Courtney over the years. Today, Frances is an artist and musician in her own right, carrying on her father's creative legacy while keeping her distance from the spotlight. Kurt's struggles with addiction continued to worsen. He found himself spiraling further into depression, feeling increasingly isolated from those around him. Despite attempts at interventions by friends and family, Kurt resisted help, often withdrawing into himself. As Kurt's personal life became more unstable, it started to take a toll on his professional life. His heroin use impacted his performances, and he began missing shows. The media portrayed him as a troubled rock star, a narrative that only added to his discontent. Behind the scenes, Kurt was falling apart. His battles with addiction, the pressure of fame, and his volatile personal life left him feeling trapped, with no way out. While the world saw him as a grunge icon, a rock legend, Kurt himself felt like he was sinking deeper into despair. As the months passed, Kurt's inner turmoil only grew worse. By early 1994, his health had deteriorated, and his addiction was spiraling out of control. Nirvana was on tour in Europe, but Kurt's physical and mental state was rapidly declining. After a show in Munich on March 1st, which would turn out to be Nirvana's final performance, Kurt was diagnosed with bronchitis and laryngitis, leading to the cancellation of the rest of the tour. He then flew to Rome for treatment, where he was joined by Courtney Love. On March 4th, 1994, Kurt was rushed to a hospital in Rome after an overdose on a mixture of champagne and Rohypnol. Love later described the incident as Kurt's first suicide attempt. He remained unconscious for the rest of the day. Although Kurt survived, it was clear to those closest to him that he was in deep trouble. He was released from the hospital 5 days later. Back in Seattle, Kurt's behavior became increasingly erratic. On March 18th, Courtney called the police, reporting that Kurt had locked himself in a room with a gun. When the police arrived, they confiscated multiple firearms and a bottle of pills, though Kurt insisted he wasn't suicidal. Despite his claims, his loved ones were becoming deeply alarmed. By the end of March, those closest to Kurt staged an intervention. Friends, bandmates, and family members begged him to seek treatment for his addiction. At first, Kurt reacted with anger and frustration, lashing out at those who cared for him, but eventually he agreed to enter rehab in Los Angeles. However, Kurt's stay in rehab was short-lived. On March 30th, 1994, just days after entering the facility, Kurt escaped. He flew back to Seattle without telling anyone, disappearing from the public eye. His friends and family were left in the dark, unaware of his whereabouts. After returning to Seattle, Kurt hid from the people Courtney Love had hired to find him. According to eyewitness accounts from people who were at the Cobain residence during those days, Kurt was hiding in parts of the house to avoid detection. He spent time talking with some of the guests, but as his condition worsened, they noticed he became increasingly distant and confused. Little did they know, the tragic conclusion was just moments away.
Kurt Cobain was found dead this morning at his Seattle estate. The lead singer of Nirvana was apparently at the house alone.
On April 5th, 1994, Kurt Cobain died in the greenhouse of his Seattle home. His body was discovered 3 days later on April 8th by an electrician who had arrived to install a security system. Next to him were a shotgun and a suicide note addressed to his childhood imaginary friend Bada, in which he expressed his disillusionment with fame and his desire for peace. Not everyone agrees with the official story. Soon after Kurt's passing, doubts began to emerge. Richard Lee, a Seattle public access host, launched a series claiming foul play just a week later, pointing out inconsistencies in police reports. Private investigator Tom Grant, hired by Courtney Love to locate Kurt after he left rehab, has also suggested that the evidence doesn't add up, citing Kurt's high dose of heroin, which he claims would have made it impossible for him to pull the trigger. Despite the many theories and frequent requests to reopen the case, the official conclusion surrounding Kurt Cobain's death remains unchanged, with authorities standing by their original findings. Kurt's death shook the world to its core. At just 27, he became part of the heartbreaking 27 Club, a group of musicians who left us far too soon. His loss wasn't just felt in the music industry, it left an unfillable void in the hearts of millions who had found solace and understanding in his music. Yet, even though Kurt is no longer with us, his voice still echoes through time. His songs continue to resonate deeply, offering comfort, connection, and a reminder that no one is truly alone in their pain. Kurt Cobain wasn't just a musician. He was a beacon of raw, unfiltered truth. And his legacy, one of vulnerability and authenticity, will forever inspire those who dare to be themselves in a world that often asks them to hide.